Hi, my name is Kathy Ekdahl, and I'm a certified personal trainer and strength and conditioning coach here in Hudson, Massachusetts. Welcome back to the Fitness Forum. We finally got back to taping some new shows for you, and this is a continuation of some of the things we've discussed on previous shows. Today, we're going to talk about shoulders, and it's actually a very complex issue. So today I'd like to outline for you some things you can do to protect your shoulders from injury, some things you can do to make your shoulders stronger and more flexible. Now, in the last couple shows, we talked a lot about posture. And when we talk about joint health, whether it's your shoulders or your hips or your back or your knees, it really does come down to posture. So I recommend that if you're looking for some basic information about joint health, about the spine and the shoulders, that you watch my previous shows as well. But today we're going to talk about shoulders specifically. Did you know that your shoulders are the most commonly injured body part in strength training? More than backs, more than knees, people hurt their shoulders. There's a couple reasons for this, and one reason is typically bodybuilders or strength training people do the wrong exercises for their shoulders, or they ignore chronic shoulder pain. So people who do a lot of bench pressing, a lot of push-ups with extra weight may actually be creating a danger for their shoulders if they're not aware of how you balance out an exercise program. A lot of people who bodybuild or do strength training work a lot on the front of the body and get the front of the body very tight, but at the risk of the back of the body. So that's one reason that your shoulders are most commonly injured in exercise. The second reason that shoulders are very commonly injured in exercise is, unlike some other joints of the body, the shoulders have a lot of movement but not a lot of bony protection. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, your hip joint. The femur comes up into the hip joint and it sits in a ball and socket. And the femur sits way deep into the socket, I should say. Well, in the shoulder joint, the socket is very, very shallow. So the humerus does not sit in the pocket very deeply. It's very shallow. In addition, when it comes to the shoulders, you don't have a lot of big bones like you do your pelvis or your femur. You have your clavicle, you have your upper back bones, your ribs, your scapula, and then you have your humerus, but there's not a lot of bones to protect the joint itself. So what goes on at the shoulder? Well, you've got a ton of muscles and their tendons as well as ligaments that hold the humerus, the upper arm, the entire arm, into the socket. And so that's good and bad. Your shoulders can do lots and lots of different types of movements and should be able to move in multiple directions. On the other hand, your shoulders need a lot of muscular support to stay healthy. So that's kind of the conundrum we're in. The shoulders are meant to be flexible, but shoulders that are too flexible or shoulders that are weak are going to be at big risk for injury. So as I always say in the beginning of every show, and especially today, you should never self-diagnose a problem, and you should never try to self-rehab or prehab any type of musculoskeletal injury, and that's especially true for the shoulders. It's very important that if you have shoulder pain or dysfunction, that you go to your doctor and get that checked out. The reason is because we really don't know if your shoulder pain is from weakness, from a torn rotator cuff or other tissues in the shoulder. It could be from misalignment in the shoulder, and it could be from poor flexibility. So any and all of those issues could affect how your shoulders feel. In addition, if you've had a history of a fall or an injury to your shoulder, you could have pre-existing internal damage in the shoulder, and that needs to be assessed by a physician. One thing that I learned, which I thought was very interesting, is that, we often think of shoulder injuries as something that happens suddenly, right? You fall, you put your arm down, you hurt your shoulder. That's not true for everybody. A lot of shoulder injuries, and especially rotator cuff problems, are chronic. It's from years and years of wear and tear. So if you think about the fibers of burlap or cotton, over time, as they stretch, they pull apart and weaken. So if I sit at a desk, here's the thing I talk about every single show, like this for 15, 20 years, I'm putting a lot of strain in the back of my shoulder. And you can actually get miniature tears there that eventually result in injury. So the question we need to answer for ourselves is, what is wrong with my shoulder? You go to a doctor for that or a physical therapist, right? But if you don't have any chronic pain, your shoulders are working pretty good, the question would be, well, what do I do? Do I strengthen? Do I stretch? Do I do both? I always recommend you do both. But depending on the individual, you might need more stretching or more strengthening. So if you watch the Olympics, the swimmers have tremendously flexible shoulders, as do the gymnasts. Do they need to stretch their shoulders? Not really. They need to keep the muscles that surround the shoulders very, very strong. On the other hand, if you're somebody who sits at a desk all day, who does a lot of heavy strength training, you don't stretch enough, you really need to stretch more. So let me show you a couple things you can figure out how you know whether or not your shoulders need stretching or strengthening. Now, there's many, many different attachments to the shoulders. You know, you have the muscles in the front of your shoulder. You have the deltoid itself, which is what most people think of as a shoulder muscle. And then you have this big complex of muscles in the back of the shoulder. You have the rotator cuff, which are 3 small muscles and one in the front, which actually hold the arm bone in the socket. And then you have all of your scapular stabilizers in the back of the shoulder. So when we assess the shoulder, there's a lot of different things we need to look at. One of the ways I first would ask that you try this for yourself is, can you bring your arms over your head easily without changing your back? Okay, so I'm going to do it from the side. Can you bring your arms easily over your head, if not behind, without arching your back? That's a sign of good flexibility for some of the muscles in the shoulder. So a lot of my clients will do this. They'll bring their arms up to about here, and then they'll say, sure, I can get my arms over my head. All right, that's me modifying my posture to get my shoulders over the head. So number 1, you should be able to bring the shoulders over your head. Number 2, you should be able to pretty easily clasp your hands behind your back. Okay, so this isn't the greatest stretch for the shoulders, but I use it for my clients to see, are the muscles of the chest too tight? If they are, you're not going to be able to get your hands back here. So that's very important. You should be able to get your hands easily behind your back. If that's easy for you, then maybe you don't have a problem with your shoulders from chest tightness. If this is easy for you, then maybe you don't have a problem with your shoulders from lat tightness. Here's another thing you can try. And you should have no pain with any of this. You should be able to just circle your arm very easily over your head. You shouldn't have any pain. You should be able to bring it straight up and back. You shouldn't have to circle way back to get that kind of movement. That's rotation of the shoulder. You should also be able to open up the elbows all the way, okay? So here, this is called no money, by the way. I love this stretch because you're rotating the shoulders, working the back of the shoulder, the rotator cuff, and you're stretching your chest. So if you try this in the mirror and you've got one arm that's out here and one arm that's only here, that's showing tightness through the right side. Another test that we use sometimes for shoulders is actually a yoga posture called cow's face. And it's very indicative of rotator cuff issues. Now, my shoulders are really tight today. I'm going to turn my back to you. But basically, you should be able to get your fingers so that they touch. Now, you'll see on this side, my left shoulder isn't so good, and it's actually been bothering me lately, so I'm a little tight. So those are some tests you can do to assess whether or not your shoulders are tight. If you fail all those tests, then the first thing you're going to do is want to work on your flexibility. So let's spend a couple moments talking about flexibility. I showed you some movements that can tell you about whether your shoulders are tight or loose. Let's incorporate those into some stretches. So I'm going to use my physio ball here. And by the way, you know, this is just one variation. There are so many variations to stretching your chest or your lats. I'm just going to show you a couple with the physio ball because I like using it. One of the things I do to stretch my chest muscles is I'm going to roll out on the physio ball. Just move back a little bit. And I'm going to rest my head on the ball. And I'm just going to let my arms hang to the side here. This is a wonderful stretch for your chest muscles. Okay, so my head is supported, my upper back is supported, my hips are up, and I'm just letting my arms hang, stretching all through the front of my shoulders, anterior deltoid, chest, pec major, pec minor, and biceps a little bit, honestly. So, you know, when you do that, you should have no pain whatsoever. You're going to feel a gigantic stretch, and that's okay, but you should have no pain. So that's a nice stretch for your shoulders. I'm going to show you also, so that's the front of the shoulders, a stretch for your lats. And again, there's so many different ways to do this. This is just one option that I use with my clients. You're going to place your hands on the ball and you're going to just roll the ball forward and let your head drop down. So now I am stretching my lats, okay? And if you need to rest your head on the ball, you certainly can do that. But I am stretching my arms over my head like this, okay? That feels really, really good. If it doesn't feel good to you, it could be indicating that that's not the right stretch for you, so don't push it, okay? So those are a couple nice stretches for the shoulders. I'm going to go down on all the way to the floor. So if you don't have a physio ball at home, a nice stretch for your chest would be lying on the floor, okay? I'm going to bring my arms out to the side. Here's yoga again, guys. I mean, I always come back to yoga. In the right setting at the right time, it's a wonderful way to loosen your body and work on core strength. So here I'm in a lying side twist, and my knees are twisting to the right. So I'm getting a big stretch on my left shoulder right now. Closer to the camera, if I bring my legs to the left, I'm getting a big stretch on my right shoulder right now. Now, if you're tight through the chest and you rotate these legs to one side, sometimes what happens is you get this big lift. And when you get this big lift like that, okay, that means your upper back and your shoulders are too tight. So that's really important information for you. If your chest muscles are too tight or if your upper back is rounded, you're more likely to hurt your shoulder throwing a ball, throwing a frisbee, working out. So those are a couple stretches you can do for your shoulders, as well as the ones that I showed you where your hands are clasped behind your back. Let me show you one of my favorite shoulder warm-ups. This is called arm circles. You lie on your side and do an arm circle. This is great for people who have pretty decent shoulder flexibility but just want to warm up. And I'll show you what not to do as well. So here I'm lying on my side. My head is on the floor. You can use a pillow if you're at home. And all you're going to do is keep your legs together. Sometimes I even like to have one leg forward like this so that I don't roll through the hips. And you're going to circle that arm over your head. Now you'll notice that I can circle my hand touching the floor all the way over to the other side. And so what I'm doing is I'm rolling back a little bit, opening up through the chest, rolling my upper back back, and I'm getting a nice big circle. People who have very tight shoulders, it might look like this. They'll get here and then they're stuck. And then they're up in the air and it doesn't feel good at all. and they can't even get their arm back here. So if you're going to do those arm circles, you never want to force the movement, okay? Nor do you want to rotate your hips back. The arm should be able to slide along the floor the whole time. I mean, that's a great test for you, okay? So those are some things that you can work on to try to loosen up the shoulders. Now, if you're one of those people who naturally have really flexible shoulders, you need to do more strengthening than stretching. And in the old days, we used to call it double jointed. Do you remember that? Where people could move their arms backwards, their elbows backwards. That actually can put you at big risk too. Your shoulders should be flexible, but not so flexible that they're, being torn off your body. Speaking of being torn off your body, it's a pleasant subject. One of the areas people get very confused about is rotator cuff. So let me explain to you a little bit about the rotator cuff, and then we're going to start to do some strengthening exercises for your shoulders. So the rotator cuff, C-U-F-F, not P, is a cuff that circles your shoulder and holds the arm bone in the socket. That's the main purpose of the rotator cuff. So there are 3 muscles in the back of your shoulder and there's 1 in the front. Now the rotator cuff also helps with rotation. So if you're an athlete who plays baseball, softball, tennis, lacrosse, any racket sport, you are really using that shoulder in external rotation a lot. That's another function of the rotator cuff. So we really want to make sure that when you strengthen the shoulder, you're strengthening the rotator cuff, okay? And not just, for example, the arm muscles themselves. So the muscles that you want to strengthen, if you find that your shoulders are flexible but not very strong, if you occasionally have shoulder pain from exercise and don't know why, once you check with your doctor, there are some very simple exercises you can do to begin to get your shoulders stronger. And I'm obviously using the term shoulder very broadly, okay? I just mean all the muscles that attach at the shoulder joint that help the arm move in various directions. So let's talk about one of the easiest ones you can do. And it's something that's really a protocol from physical therapy, and it's called ITY. I'm also going to show you a version called ITW. And if I had a client and I was a physical therapist who had a shoulder issue, this is where I'd start. The reason we start with this exercise is that it works the muscles of the upper back, and they're such big muscles and they tend to be weak in people who especially don't exercise, that this is a great place to start. So ITW, again, I'm going to use a physio ball. Some people will also lie on a bench. If you lie on a bench, you'll only be able to do this maybe with 1 arm at a time. But here I'm going to show you a variation on the physio ball. So I'm just going to get my body up on the ball, mainly so I'm just kind of in a lifted position. Separate your feet so that you have good stability. This kind of gives you the Heimlich a little bit, but I think you can handle it. So ITY, carefully, I'm lifting my arms over my head. There's the I. T, out to the side, squeezing the shoulders together. Y, pressing back. Okay, so it's an easy one to remember. I, T, and Y. So what that does is it works your upper part of your upper back, your upper traps and levators, the middle of your back, and then your lower trapezius. Now your lower trapezius, which is down here, as opposed to up here, is responsible for pulling your shoulder blades down. So if you're like this a lot, you really need to work these muscles down here. And the Y portion of this will certainly do that. The other thing I want to remind you is anytime you lift your arm over your head, you shouldn't be rising your shoulders up. This should not be lifting. You should be able to lift your arms over your head without this happening. So I'm going to repeat the ITY this time, and I want you to notice that my shoulders are not coming up. So here I am on the ball, or I'm lying on the bench or the side of my bed. I'm going to do I, T, and Y. So here's what it looks like if you're not paying attention to your shoulders. Here's I, see how my shoulders are way up? Here's T, shoulders are way up, right? We don't want to do that. Keep your shoulders down. So that's going to work the broad surface of your upper back. Sometimes I like to do a W here too, which is even harder. And this is great for rotation. So I'm going to, again, get onto the ball. Nice tall body, nice straight back. By the way, sometimes you'll feel tension in your back here because you're using some of your low back muscles to keep you extended. So it's an I. Then I'm going to bring the elbows up here, and I'm going to rotate. And back down, and then Y. So this is I, and then this is called W, okay? And then that's back Y. So I'm going to do that one more time. This W, elbows are up and parallel with the shoulders, okay? Rotate up as much as you can, and back down, and then Y. That W is much harder. It's actually like doing this, okay? But you're against gravity, so you're really working some great muscles there. Excellent exercise for the shoulders. One thing I want you to notice is when you're standing, what's the position of your arm next to your body? So for example, let me show you. If when you're standing, your arms are forward, thumbs turned into your body, that means you're very tight through the front of your shoulders. Anatomically, it's much better off for the thumbs to be pointed straight ahead like this, or even out a little bit. So notice my posture. When my shoulders are rotated in, my thumbs point in. That's how people develop shoulder issues. Really, I want my thumbs straight ahead, okay? Notice how my shoulders pull back when my thumbs are straight ahead. So, I showed you the most basic, really, of all exercises for the shoulders. We're going to move forward now with some other exercises, and these will get progressively harder. So I'm going to start by going onto the floor, and we're just going to put the ball over here because the ball has a mind of its own, and it will wander. All right, so I'm using a very light weight for this next exercise. Remember I mentioned that the rotator cuff holds the arm bone in the socket, but it also does rotation. And this rotation is extremely important to balance the health of the shoulders, and if you do any type of throwing, whether it's frisbee or softball or lacrosse, you need to have that kind of rotation. So when you start this exercise, you might only be using 1 or 2 pounds. I'm going to use 5, and I'll tell you that's borderline too heavy for me. And even where I work out, where a lot of people lift very heavy weights, I've never seen anybody do more than 10 pounds on this. So remember I talked about how bodybuilders often do an incorrect exercise with an incorrect weight? This would be an example of somebody, who chooses a 15-pound weight and does their external rotation and then rips their rotator cuff. So the purpose of this exercise is to strengthen the rotators, the external rotators, and the rotator cuff. But they're small muscles, and you don't want to use a lot of weight. So that's external rotation. And obviously, I do the other side as well. But because we're trying to jam a lot in here, I just want to demonstrate that. If you're at the gym, and you're a usual lifter, strength trainer, and you do a lot of strength training, this is a must. It has to be in your program. Unlike some of the other muscles you might work at the gym, don't try and kill your rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is not a prime mover, it's an assister, and it's a stabilizer, so you don't want to use a lot of weight for that, okay? So you've got to add that exercise in. It's very, very important. It's amazing how many people at the gym don't work their shoulders in the right way. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. I'm going to get up and I'm going to show you a couple of other exercises. So at the gym, most people I know do exercises like this and this. So it's a lateral raise, a frontal raise, or they'll do a lot of heavy overhead pressing. You know, unless your rotator cuff is strong to begin with, those exercises could actually injure your shoulder. I'm not a fan of lateral raises anymore. Most people just don't have the shoulder stability to do it well. So if you're taking 10s, 15s, 20s and doing repeated shoulder raises, you could actually be injuring your shoulder. An upright row, which we used to do a lot to try to strengthen the shoulder, is the worst exercise for your shoulders. It actually puts you at risk for more injury. And overhead pressing, which is very valuable exercise for a lot of athletes, you have to make sure you build up to it. Work your upper back really a lot before you start to do a lot of overhead pressing. Some people do too much overhead pressing and they can develop something called shoulder impingement, where all the tissue here in the front of your shoulder and your neck gets impinged. You get pain, you could get swelling, you could get numbness. So knock off the heavy overhead pressing until your upper back is very, very strong. One of the exercises which we used to do a lot is called an empty can exercise, where the thumbs are down and the arms lift to the side. You know, if your physical therapist gives this to you, fine. But this is not a great exercise either. So there's been a big evolution in how we look at shoulders and what exercises are important for shoulders. And these ones, in general, should not be done. You don't need to do them. So what do you do? Well, a lot of rowing. Okay, so I'm going to stand up and just kind of talk a little bit about rowing and show you some different variations. Rowing is any exercise which causes the shoulder blades to squeeze together in the back. So here, this kind of rowing, sometimes I use elastics like this. You know, I'll attach them to a door and then pull back here. That's very, very important for the shoulder. Now, we have different tension elastics. So I use a black elastic for this kind of rowing. I also like to do a single arm row, where what I might do is put both handles in one hand and row. And obviously you need to attach this to a door. You know, if you don't have tubing, you go back to the old classic, kneeling dumbbell row. It's the best. Okay, you can go down on one knee, and this is not the best position for it, and row. What a great exercise this is for the upper back and for shoulder health. Another one which I really like is a straight arm press back. And this can also be done with the tubing. If I use tubing, you have to attach it high in a door and pull down. But notice what's happening when I do this. So, as I pull it down or as I press it back, I'm working those lower trapezius that I talked about earlier. You go down, okay? Shoulders down, not shoulders up. That's a big mistake people make. As they press down, their shoulders go up. You want to press down and get the shoulders down as well. Notice I'm lifting my chest the whole time. That's a big part of it. This is called kyphotic posture, and kyphotic posture puts your shoulders at risk. So I showed you a few different exercises. We didn't get into a lot of heavy weight because most people, unless you're training at the gym, kind of need a baseline to know where to start. I think the ITY is a great place to start. I think the rotation with the weight, as I did on the floor, is also a great place to start. And then add some rows. You know, you can do all of those in one program. Also, planks. Push-ups, planks, straight arm planks, side bridges, side plank, or on both elbows. That really helps the rotator cuff because it pushes the arm bone into the socket, and that's what the rotator cuff does. So, as always, if you have any questions or concerns, you can email me at Kathy. That's Kathy at personalbestpersonaltraining.com. You can also go to my website and check it out. And I'm always here to entertain any questions that you might have or suggestions for future shows. Today, it's important to keep care of your shoulders, and I hope that I provided you with some information that are going to keep your shoulders really, really healthy. So until I see you again, take care, keep exercising, please.